The first sign of trouble was a letter, a crisp white envelope tucked under my truck's windshield wiper, the kind that promised nothing but frustration. I had just finished my morning rounds on the ranch, checking the fences and making sure the cattle were fed, when I spotted it flapping in the wind like some kind of omen. I didn't even have to open it to know it was from her, Madeline Porter, 54 years old, two-time HOA president, and the kind of woman who wielded bylaws like a medieval battle axe. She had moved into the newly built Whispering Pines Estates 2 years ago and immediately decided that my family's ranch, my land, was an eyesore, an inconvenience, an obstacle to be corrected. I unfolded the letter with a sigh. Dear Mr. Calloway, this is your official notice regarding violations of Whispering Pines Estates community standards. We regret to inform you that your property does not align with our approved landscaping guidelines, and therefore, immediate corrective action is required. 1. The perimeter fencing on your land has been deemed visually disruptive and is in violation of Section 14.2 of our HOA guidelines. 2. Your livestock has been observed, creating an unsanitary atmosphere, in direct conflict with our community cleanliness regulations. 3. The general condition of your barn is inconsistent with the aesthetic harmony of Whispering Pines. Please note that failure to comply within 7 days will result in a daily fine of $250. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Unbelievable. Wasn't even part of the HOA. Whispering Pines had been built on the edge of my family's land, sure, but my grandfather had never sold an inch of it to developers. This ranch had been Calloway land for generations, long before the first McMansion popped up beyond the tree line. Yet here was Madeline Porter, acting like she owned the place. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the truck bed. Normally, I'd let this kind of thing roll off my back, but something about the sheer arrogance of it made my hands itch. Maybe it was the way she phrased it, like I was some outsider imposing on her neighborhood instead of the other way around. Maybe it was the memory of last month, when she tried to have my ranch gate forcibly removed because it interfered with the visual continuity of the main road. Or maybe it was the way she looked at me at the last HOA meeting when I dared to push back, smug, untouchable, like she already knew she was going to win. I climbed into my truck and headed toward her house. Her place was easy to find. It was the biggest house in the neighborhood, a 2-story behemoth with a circular driveway and perfectly symmetrical flower beds. The kind of house that screamed control. I barely had to knock before the door swung open. "Ah," she said, tilting her chin up. "Mr. Calloway." Madeline Porter had the face of a woman who had never lost an argument in her life, sharp-featured and immaculately put together. Even now, in her perfectly tailored blazer, she looked like she was just waiting for an opportunity to scold someone. Held up the letter. "You want to explain this to me?" She smiled, actually smiled, like she was expecting this. "Oh, there's nothing to explain. We have standards in Whispering Pines, and your establishment isn't quite meeting them." I let out a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. "That's because I'm not part of Whispering Pines. My land isn't covered by your HOA." She gave a little shake of her head like I was a particularly slow student. "Well, see, that's where you're mistaken. The neighborhood's development plan includes guidelines for all adjacent properties that affect our quality of life. Since your land directly borders our community, your compliance is necessary for maintaining property values." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. "That's not how the law works." "Oh, but it is," she said, eyes gleaming. "I suggest you consult a lawyer if you have concerns. Otherwise, I expect those issues handled by the end of the week." With that, she shut the door in my face. I spent the next few days ignoring her letter. The way I saw it, she had no legal ground to stand on, and I wasn't about to let some self-important bureaucrat tell me what to do on my own land. Then the fines started. I found the first one nailed to my fence post like some kind of old-timey bounty notice, $250 for non-compliance. The next day, another. By the end of the week, I was apparently $1,750 in the hole for the crime of existing. Then, things got worse. My mailbox disappeared. Just gone, ripped out of the ground overnight. The county clerk's office suddenly had my property taxes under review for a potential reassessment. A contractor showed up at my front gate saying he'd been hired to evaluate the removal of my barn. And through it all, I saw her watching. Every time I drove past the entrance of Whispering Pines, she was there, standing by her pristine white porch, arms crossed, lips curled into the faintest hint of satisfaction. That was when I realized this wasn't about rules. This was about power, and I had just become her personal project. I needed to put a stop to this. But I also knew that if I acted too soon, I'd be playing right into her hands. No, I had to be smart, careful. I had to find something she didn't expect. I spent the next few nights digging through my grandfather's old records, looking for anything that could give me an edge. And that's when I found it. An old survey map, yellowed with age but still perfectly legible. My grandfather's original deed, clear as day. And right there, in bold black ink, were the words that changed everything. Property line. Whispering Pines Estates development does not extend beyond this boundary. I stared at the map, heart pounding. Madeline Porter had built her kingdom on a lie, and I was about to bring the whole damn thing down. I spent the next hour scrutinizing the old survey map, tracing the property lines with my finger until the ink practically burned into my brain. The documents were clear. My grandfather had never sold an inch of our land, which meant every bit of Whispering Pines that stretched beyond the original boundary wasn't just an overreach, it was theft. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly. I had something now, something real. But if I marched straight to Madeline, with this, she'd twist it, stall, find some legal loophole to keep herself in control. No, I had to be smarter. The thought barely settled before the hum of an engine broke the night's quiet. Headlights cut through the window, bouncing off the barn's rusted tin roof. I stepped outside, shotgun in hand, and spotted a sleek black sedan parked at the edge of my drive, HOA patrol. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Roger Finch. Roger was Madeline's favorite errand boy, middle-aged, pot-bellied, and convinced. Wearing a clipboard made him important. He adjusted his wire-framed glasses, squinting at me as if he were a real lawman instead of a guy whose biggest achievement was once getting a neighbor fined for using the wrong shade of mulch. "Evening, Calloway," he said, looking entirely too smug for a man trespassing on my property. "Get off my land, Roger." He smirked. "Just here to document ongoing violations." I stepped forward, tightening my grip on the shotgun. "That right?" Roger hesitated, eyes flicking toward the gun barrel. He swallowed, then quickly cleared his throat. Now. Let's keep this civil. This is official HOA business. You're in severe noncompliance, Calloway. The fines have doubled." I stiffened. "Doubled?" He nodded, flipping through his clipboard with exaggerated slowness. "Per Madeline's orders, each day you fail to comply adds another $500. As of tonight, you owe—" He squinted at the page, pretending to do the math. $8,250. I clenched my jaw. "That's illegal, and you know it." Roger's grin widened. "Take it up with Madeline." He turned to leave, but before he could retreat to his car, I called out, "That land you're standing on, you sure it even belongs to Whispering Pines?" He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. I saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes before he hid behind another smirk. "Don't be ridiculous. The HOA has full authority." I held up the old survey map. "Yeah? Because I've got some real documents that say otherwise." His face twitched. I stepped closer, watching him squirm. "Tell Madeline that before she goes throwing her weight around, she might want to double-check where her kingdom actually starts and stops." Roger said nothing. He just yanked open his car door and sped off, taillights disappearing into the dark. The next morning, the retaliation started. First, my power went out. Not a simple outage, but a full-scale shutdown. I called the electric company, and after getting transferred 6 different times, I was finally told that a community request had flagged my property as a hazard, leading to an immediate disconnection. A community request. I didn't need 3 guesses to figure out who was behind it. Then, my water pressure dropped. When I checked the main valve, I found it had been tampered with, partially shut off. No proof of who did it, but the message was clear. And then the county assessor showed up. A balding man in a wrinkled button-down. He stood on my porch and informed me that, due to a formal complaint, my property was undergoing an emergency reassessment for tax purposes. I exhaled sharply. And who exactly filed this complaint? He glanced at his clipboard. A Mrs. Madeline Porter. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course. I didn't have time for this. I needed to get ahead of Madeline, but she was moving faster than I expected. She wasn't just fighting to push me out. She was setting the stage to ruin me before I could even get my case together. But she had made a mistake. She had overplayed her hand. Because that night, I got a call from Tom Jensen. Tom was a quiet, no-nonsense lawyer who had handled my grandfather's affairs for years. I hadn't spoken to him much since inheriting the ranch, but when I showed up at his office with the old survey map and a stack of HOA violation notices, he barely glanced at them before nodding. "You've got them," he said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" He slid his reading glasses up the bridge of his nose and leaned back. "This isn't just a boundary issue. This is fraud." My stomach tightened. "Explain." Tom tapped the survey. Madeline Porter and her HOA expanded, their development onto your land without legal claim. They filed permits under the assumption that this land was already part of their jurisdiction, but it never was. I nodded. "Right. So what's the play?" Tom grinned. "If we can prove that some of those houses were built on land they never actually owned." I stiffened. "Then every homeowner in Whispering Pines is living in a house built on a lie." A cold realization settled over me. This wasn't just about my ranch. If what Tom was saying was true, then half the neighborhood was sitting on land that wasn't legally theirs. And if I played this right, I wouldn't just stop Madeline. I'd turn her entire community against her. I exhaled, rubbing my jaw. "We can really prove this?" Tom nodded. "Oh, we can more than prove it." The gears in my head started turning. Madeline had spent years convincing everyone she was untouchable, that she held the power, that she could bend the rules and no one would dare challenge her. But she had built her empire on stolen ground, and I was about to pull the rug right out from under her feet. That night, I watched from my porch as the Whispering Pines Security Patrol idled at the edge of my property, their headlights casting eerie beams through the trees. A warning, but they didn't scare me, because tomorrow I was going to walk right into her next HOA meeting, and I wasn't coming alone. The next evening, I parked my truck just outside the Whispering Pines clubhouse. The place was a monument to excess, a gleaming white building with a marble-tiled entryway, and a gold-lettered sign that read, Whispering Pines Community Center, a place of harmony, a place of control, more like it. Tom Jensen sat in the passenger seat beside me, flipping through the property documents one last time. "You ready for this?" I smirked. I was born ready. In the back seat sat two more people, Jim and Lisa Carver, a couple who had been among the first homeowners in Whispering Pines. Jim was a former contractor, and Lisa worked in real estate. When I had told them what I found, that their dream, home might be sitting on stolen land, Lisa nearly passed out. Jim had taken one look at the old survey and muttered, "That woman's a damn crook." They weren't the only ones. Word had spread. In the past 24 hours, I'd spoken to half a dozen homeowners who had never even thought to question the HOA's authority. People who had been forced to repaint their homes, remove patio furniture, or pay endless fines for infractions Madeline had invented out of thin air. And now? They weren't just mad, they were hungry for blood. I stepped out of my truck and adjusted my hat. Let's give Madeline a meeting she won't forget. The clubhouse was packed. Rows of chairs lined the room, all facing a long, polished table, where Madeline sat, flanked by her loyal enforcers, Roger Finch at her right, and two other board members who looked like they'd been plucked straight out of a country club. The moment I stepped inside, every pair of eyes landed on me. Madeline's. Lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. "Ah, Mr. Calloway," she purred, her voice dripping with fake warmth. "I didn't realize you were joining us tonight." I gave her a polite nod. "Wouldn't miss it?" She arched an eyebrow but didn't press further. Instead, she cleared her throat and lifted a sheet of paper. "Before we begin, let's discuss ongoing violations within our community." I could feel half the room stiffen. We have several outstanding fines, she continued, glancing in my direction, including one property owner who has neglected to maintain the standards expected of those residing adjacent to our neighborhood. I folded my arms. You mean me? She gave me an innocent look. If the shoe fits. A few people in the audience murmured. Some exchanged glances. Not everyone here was on her side anymore. Time to push. I took a step forward. Before we get into that, I think we should discuss a more pressing issue, one that affects every homeowner. Here. Madeline's smile flickered. I pulled out the old property survey and held it up. This, I said, voice clear, is the original property map of Calloway Ranch. It proves, beyond a doubt, that my land extends past the Whispering Pines development. That means a good number of homes in this neighborhood were built on land the HOA has no legal claim to. Silence. Then, chaos. People started whispering. Someone gasped. I heard a man in the back say, "What the hell is he talking about?" Madeline did not blink. Her hand curled into a fist, but her voice remained steady. "That's ridiculous." Tom stepped up beside me. Not ridiculous at all. In fact, we've had a legal review done, and it turns out the HOA has been collecting fees and issuing violations on land it never had jurisdiction over. The whispering turned into outright arguing. Is this true? My property? Is my house even legally mine? Madeline lifted her hands. Everyone, let's keep our heads. Mr. Calloway is mistaken. No, you're mistaken, Madeline. Jim Carver stood up. His wife, Lisa, was right beside him. We checked the records, Jim said, his voice shaking with barely contained fury. Turns out, our property deeds don't match what's registered with the county. The HOA made us pay for land that wasn't legally theirs to begin with. The floodgates opened. People stood up, shouted. Some turned on Madeline right then and there. What is this? You mean we've been paying fines for nothing? I knew something was fishy about this damn HOA. Madeline slammed her palm onto the table. Enough! Silence crashed over the room. Her nostrils flared as she glared at me. This is a desperate attempt to derail our meeting with baseless accusations. I smiled. If they're baseless, you won't mind proving it. Publicly. She hesitated, just for a second. That was all it took. Jim seized the moment. I want answers, and if you don't have them, maybe it's time we started asking the county to step in. Madeline's expression darkened. She knew. She knew this was bigger than a simple HOA dispute. If the county got involved, they'd audit everything. The permits, the property deeds, the HOA's finances, everything she'd built would come crumbling down. Her jaw tightened. Fine, she said coolly. I'll have our legal team review the claims. But in the meantime, our community rules still stand, and Mr. Calloway is still in violation. I laughed. That's so? I tilted my head. Because I did a little digging into your community. Rules. I pulled out another document, a printed copy of the Whispering Pines HOA bylaws. I noticed a little discrepancy, I continued. Turns out, according to Section 5.7b, for any new rule to be enforced, it needs a formal vote by all HOA members. And wouldn't you know it, half the rules you've been enforcing never had a vote. Madeline went rigid. I turned to the crowd. That means every fine, every violation, every aesthetic adjustment you were forced to make, none of it was legally binding. Gasps. A woman in the front clapped a hand over her mouth. Madeline was losing them, and she knew it. Her face paled, but she wasn't done. Not yet, she straightened, smoothing her blazer. That's an interesting interpretation, Mr. Calloway, but as you said, if there's a legal issue, I'm sure it will be resolved properly. Until then, Whispering Pines will continue to operate as it always has. I smirked. Oh, I don't think it will. Because now I had the community questioning everything. I had planted the seed of doubt. And judging by the way Madeline clenched, her jaw, she knew it was only going to grow. As I turned to leave, Roger Finch scurried up behind Madeline, whispering frantically in her ear. She didn't respond, but her grip on the table was turning her knuckles white. Good. Because I wasn't done yet. Not even close. That night, as I pulled up to my ranch, I noticed something was off. My front gate was open. My barn door swung slightly, ajar, and as I stepped out of the truck, I spotted something on my porch. A single white envelope. I opened it. Inside was a court summons, a formal lawsuit from Madeline Porter. I let out a slow breath, my pulse steady. So, she wanted war. She was about to get one. The weight of the lawsuit sat heavy in my hands, but I refused to let it rattle me. This was Madeline's last-ditch effort to shut me down. I could almost hear her smug voice dictating the paperwork, trying to drown me in legal fees, intimidate me into backing down. Not gonna happen. I stepped onto my porch, the floorboards creaking beneath my boots, and ripped the envelope open. The legal jargon was thick, designed to overwhelm, but Tom had already warned me this was coming. Plaintiff, Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. Defendant, Lucas Calloway. Cause, repeated failure to comply with HOA regulations, deliberate community disruption, defamation of board leadership. I exhaled slowly. She really threw the book at me. But she'd made a mistake. Several, actually. Tom would eat this alive in court, but I didn't have to wait that long to make my next move. Madeline had built her power on the illusion that she was untouchable. She had the homeowners scared, the board under her thumb, the whole damn neighborhood bending to her will, but that illusion was cracking, and I was about to shatter it completely. By morning, the lawsuit was already making its rounds. Whispering Pines was buzzing. I could feel the shift. Not fear, but fury. I saw it in the way Lisa Carver stormed into the coffee shop and slammed the newspaper down in front of a group of other homeowners. In the way Jim spat into the dirt outside his driveway, muttering, "She's out of control." I let the tension build, let the anger simmer. Then I called a meeting of my own. I held it at my ranch, right in my barn, the very same one Madeline had tried to have removed. Word spread fast. By the time the sun started dipping below the trees, a crowd had gathered. I stood in front of them, arms crossed, letting them talk. "She's lost her damn mind," a man near the back grumbled. "She's trying to bury you in legal fees," Lisa muttered. "If she wins this, she'll do the same to anyone who speaks out." "That's exactly what she wants," I said. My voice carried over the group, the low murmur of conversation dying down. She wants everyone to think she's untouchable. That no matter how many lies she tells, how much money she steals, no one can stop her. Silence. Then a woman near the front, Annette Holt, a retired teacher who had lived in Whispering Pines since the beginning, lifted her chin. "What can we do?" I looked around the group, seeing the doubt, the anger, the frustration. But beneath it all, hope. "We push back," I said. "Not just in court, in public. We drag everything she's done into the light." I turned to Tom, who stepped forward, holding up a thick stack of papers. "These," he said, voice crisp, "are property records, tax filings, and HOA budgets. We've gone through every inch of Whispering Pines' finances. And guess what? Madeline's been cooking the books." Gasps. Jim leaned forward. "Explain." Tom smirked. "We found discrepancies in how the HOA spends its money. Thousands of dollars misallocated. Fake maintenance costs, double-charged fees, and, get this, a series of legal fees paid to a firm that doesn't actually exist." Lisa's eyes widened. "She's embezzling?" Tom nodded. "Looks that way." A slow, dangerous energy rippled through the crowd. I let the moment settle before I spoke again. "We don't just take this to court," I said. "We take it to the people. We hold a public meeting. We invite every single homeowner. We put this in front of them. In front of the press, in front of anyone who will listen." Lisa grinned. "We give her nowhere to hide." I nodded. "Exactly." Madeline found out about the meeting by morning. By noon, she was already retaliating. The county sent an inspector to my ranch. "This property is under review for zoning violations," the man said, looking more uncomfortable than authoritative. "Someone filed a complaint about illegal land use." I crossed my arms. "Let me guess. Madeline Porter?" He hesitated. "I can't disclose that." I laughed. "Of course." I let him do his inspection, not that he'd find anything. But it was just another reminder that Madeline wasn't backing down. She wasn't scared. Not yet. But she would be. The meeting was set for Friday night. By then, the community was boiling over. People who had once blindly followed Madeline were asking questions. Some weren't ready to turn on her yet, but they were doubting. And doubt was the beginning of the end. When I arrived at the clubhouse, it was packed. The crowd had tripled from the last HOA meeting. More than just homeowners, local reporters were here too. I spotted Madeline near the front, her expression carefully composed. But the moment our eyes met, I saw it, the flicker of unease. She hadn't expected this. I stepped up to the front, standing beside Tom. The room fell silent. And then, before I could speak, Madeline did. "This," she said, gesturing around, "is nothing more than a desperate attempt to disrupt our community." Murmurs. "Mr. Calloway is trying to destroy everything we've built here. He doesn't care about Whispering Pines. He just wants to tear down its leadership." I let her talk. Let her dig her own grave. "But let's be clear," she continued. "This is not about truth. This is about power. Mr. Calloway is trying to undermine authority, and in doing so, he is putting our entire community at risk." Silence. Then I stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "I'm not trying to destroy this community," I said. "I'm trying to save it." I held up a stack of papers, the financial records. "And I'm not the one putting you at risk," I continued. "She is." I passed the papers to Lisa, who started handing them out. The crowd leaned in, scanning the numbers, the evidence, the undeniable proof that Madeline had been using their money to line her own pockets. A woman in the back gasped. "Oh my God!" Madeline's face turned ghost white. "Every fine, every—" "Ridiculous rule, every fee you've paid," I said. "It's been funding her." Murmurs turned to outrage. "She stole from us? She's been running this place like a damn dictatorship. This is fraud. She needs to be arrested." Madeline's jaw clenched. "These are misinterpretations of our accounting." I cut her off. "Oh? Then explain the checks made out to a non-existent law firm. Explain the double-charged fees. Explain the $45,000 withdrawal labeled as administrative costs." The room erupted. People shouted. Some stood up, and for the first time I saw fear in Madeline's eyes. She had lost control, and she knew it. But then, just as I thought, I had her cornered. She did something I didn't expect. She smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, and then she pulled out a document of her own, a second lawsuit, against me. "For defamation," she said smoothly, "and fraud." The room fell silent. My stomach clenched. She wasn't just trying to fight back, she was trying to ruin me. Madeline stood tall, her lips curled into a confident smirk as she handed the papers off to Roger Finch, who dramatically placed them onto the table like she had just presented some grand checkmate. "This is a formal lawsuit against Lucas Calloway for defamation and fraud," she announced, her voice sharp and steady. "This reckless attack on my reputation will not go unchallenged." The room stilled. Then came the murmurs. Whispering Pines had been shaken to its core tonight, and now, just when people were beginning to turn against her, she was making a play to flip the narrative. Frame me as the liar. I took a slow breath, locking eyes with her. I should have expected this. She wasn't just going to go down quietly, but she had made a critical mistake. She thought she was still in control. She wasn't. Tom took the lawsuit from Roger's hands and flipped through it. The second his eyes skimmed the fine print, he exhaled a quiet laugh. I arched an eyebrow. "Something funny?" Tom smirked, turning the pages toward me. "She really is getting desperate." Madeline stiffened. "That lawsuit is legitimate." Tom tapped the section labeled evidence. "Is it? Because all I see here is an affidavit signed by— Oh, would you look at that? Roger Finch." Roger visibly shrunk in his chair. Tom continued. "You didn't even hire an independent attorney to draft this, Madeline. You just threw together a complaint and had your HOA lackey sign off on it? Sloppy work." Madeline's fingers curled into fists. "It doesn't change the facts." I took a step forward. "Oh, but it does. Because this isn't just a civil case anymore." I turned to the crowd. "This is a cover-up, a way to silence anyone who exposes her corruption. I let my voice ring out, steady and unshaken. And if I go down, you better believe she'll come for the rest of you next. That struck a nerve. Lisa Carver stood abruptly. She already has. People started nodding. A man in the back called out, "She fined me for a mailbox violation and then forced me to buy one from her approved vendor for triple the price. She made me repaint my house twice in 1 year. Then I found out the painter was her cousin." More and more people joined in. The anger swelled, bubbling into a tide that even Madeline couldn't suppress. Her face remained impassive, but I could see the cracks. She was losing them. Completely. I turned back to Tom, who was already pulling out his phone. "I think this lawsuit needs a closer look. I'll be forwarding this to the county court. If we find that you fabricated any evidence," he let that hang in the air, "you'll be facing legal consequences of your own." Madeline finally blinked. I watched her calculate. She wasn't used to losing. She opened her mouth, ready to spin another excuse, but I didn't let her. I pulled out one final card. "I did some digging of my own," I said, pulling out a flash drive. "This contains every financial discrepancy, every double charge, every fraudulent maintenance fee you funneled through the HOA. I turned to the crowd. "I'm not taking this to just the county court." I smiled. "I'm taking it to the state attorney's office." Silence. Then, chaos. Roger bolted from his chair like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. Several board members exchanged panicked looks, whispers breaking out in frantic waves. And Madeline? For the first time, she looked afraid. You're bluffing," she hissed. I chuckled. "Am I?" I nodded toward the back of the room. 2 reporters had just walked in. Cameras, notepads, they had been tipped off. This was going public. Madeline turned pale. She had spent years terrifying these people, dictating their lives, ruling over them with absolute authority. And now, in a single night, it was all crashing down. She pushed back from the table, storming toward the door. "Madeline Porter!" A voice boomed from the entrance. "A sheriff's deputy!" The entire room gasped. Madeline froze. "Ma'am," the deputy said, stepping forward, "we need to have a word about some financial irregularities flagged in your HOA's recent filings." She spun, wild-eyed. This is ridiculous. This is a witch hunt." The deputy calmly pulled out a folder. "We received an anonymous tip about fraudulent activity in Whispering Pines. The state is now opening an investigation." Anonymous. Tip, I smiled. I had made sure the right people were looking at the evidence before I even walked into this meeting. The deputy gestured toward the door. "Ma'am, if you'll come with us," Madeline snapped. "I built this community," she shrieked. People would be nothing without me." The room erupted into boos. Lisa Carver stood up, crossing her arms. "We'll take our chances." 2 more officers stepped forward. Madeline shoved past them, trying to escape, but there was nowhere left to run. The handcuffs clicked, and just like that, it was over. The news spread fast. Within hours, Madeline's downfall was on every local station. The HOA board collapsed overnight. Roger Finch resigned in disgrace. The county issued a formal audit into every fraudulent fee and fine. Homeowners started fighting back. They refused to pay outstanding HOA fees, demanded refunds. Whispering Pines turned on its queen. And me? I filed my own paperwork. A legal petition to dissolve the HOA completely. It passed unanimously. Whispering Pines would no longer be a dictatorship. It would be a community. A few weeks later, I stood at my fence line, watching as a crew tore down the ridiculous HOA security gate that had once kept my ranch separate from the neighborhood. Lisa Carver leaned against the post beside me. "Feels good, doesn't it?" I smirked. "Damn right it does." The HOA was gone. The ranch was safe. And Madeline Porter? She was facing a long list of charges. Somewhere in a courtroom, she was probably still ranting about how she had done nothing wrong. Didn't matter. She had lost. And the next time someone tried to pull the same stunt, this community would be ready. Tipped my hat. Guess the queen didn't like losing her crown. Lisa laughed. Nope, but she sure as hell deserved it. I turned back toward my land, breathing in the fresh air. It had been a long fight, but in the end, we won. and whispering. Pines would never belong to another Madeline Porter again.